And so it begins. I can only imagine what the comment section is going to look like just based off of the title alone. Following up the debatably enjoyable 22-minute special Total Eclipse of the Cart comes another episode involving the Powerpuff Girls and Mojo Jojo teaming up together, and in a desert no less. And it's not terribly good. How do I put this delicately? The professor is once again proven to be a terrible father for the sake of unfunny and stupid reasons. Rather than be a responsible adult who cares for the safety of his children, he's an incompetent moron who puts the entirety of society at risk because he lacks basic self-awareness. Quarantine, as the episode is titled, deserves just that. To be quarantined, as it is one of my least favorite episodes of Season 3 thus far. But I suppose we should just get right into this.
Sure, sorry.
Thanks, Professor!
The setting opens up to the desert. The very same desert our heroes were seen racing through in the last episode, although Jimore is nowhere to be seen. Turns out the professor is rushing to get a very dangerous chemical to Townsville's lab facility so that it can be quarantined before anybody else gets affected by its terrible radiation. The girls are aiding in this escort, and it's a good thing too, because Mojo Jojo must have caught wind of this somehow, seeing as he is seeking to acquire that toxic chemical for himself, likely as a replacement for the toxic waste he had to dump back during the events of Save the Date. The girls have no problem beating him up, however, although he ends up landing on their car windshield because physics have been all out of whack ever since Buttercup distorted them in Ragnarok and Roll. And as much as I'd love to say the characters died and the episode ends right there, that's not quite the truth. As it turns out, the four of them find themselves waking up in the same room together, and the girls decide to pounce on Mojo and attack him before he even has time to realize what's going on. And then the professor comes in to explain everything.
You're under quarantine and can't leave this room because one of you is going to turn into a man-eating monster.
What?
What? Oh, sorry, it startles me to even say it too.
Okay, so like, having the characters be quarantined after getting exposed to that wicked virus makes perfect sense, but everything else, not even close. I mean, for starters, the professor is the one to be expositing all of this information to the rest of the characters, and if his track record is anything to go by, this is the last man on Earth who should be in charge of handling a highly reactive isotope in the first place.
Inside that vial was a rare and terrible virus from the moons of Saturn. When the vial exploded, the virus was released, and one of you became infected.
This explanation made me raise a lot of questions, such as, why is only one of them going to turn into this mystical Saturnian porky swine as he describes, if all four of them were right there when the test tube exploded and were clearly enveloped in the gas that was released? Why is only one of them going to be infected? It's a gas. They all inhaled it. That's not how viruses work. And like, you can just shrug it off and say it's a cartoon, but that completely misses the point. It's entirely reasonable to question how this virus functions if it directly goes against what is presented on screen. How does this gas that encapsulates all of these characters only truly infect one of them? It's not like there's an actual thing inside the test tube that acts as some sort of parasite. Honestly, that would have clarified the problem big time, because if we did see one single creature get out and crawl into one of the characters' mouths or something, or not even directly into one of the characters, but just crawl out and go towards them, that way it keeps it a secret as to who's actually infected, then it would make perfect sense as to why only one of them could possibly be carrying the disease and nobody else. But the fact that this is a viral infection that is transferred through gas in the air means it should affect anyone who breathes it. Now, another argument you can make is that they could possibly be immune to it because their immune system was genetically composed of the right makeup to not be affected by the virus. That is another completely plausible idea, except for the fact that the episode presents this as though it is completely random. if some of them were immune, then we should be able to test who's immune and who isn't. At the same time, there should also be the possibility that none of them are infected, or that more than one of them are infected. The fact that the professor specifically states one of these characters has the ability to turn into a Porcuswine means that there is not that possibility. But alas, we have to assume that some magical gas was only enabled by one of these characters, while all of the others managed to get out completely clean.
But at some point, one of you will burst out of your skin and turn into a Saturnian Porcuswine. I drew this in between panic attacks.
Mojo is impressed with your shading techniques, but finds your attempts at perspective laughable.
Also, shame on the professor for locking all 4 of these characters together in the same room. This man is fully aware of what a Porcuswine is capable of, that being the fact that it devours every living being in its sights. So, essentially, this man thinks it's a good idea to lock all 3 of his daughters up in the same room together, knowing fully well that at least 2 of them will die, because there is a 3 in 4 chance that one of them could grow into this gigantic monster and potentially kill them. Or there's the possibility that the 2 sisters that aren't infected end up killing the 3rd one. There's a lot of possibilities here where at least one of the girls could die. I mean, I get that they're superheroes, and this is a kid's cartoon, but when looking at the professor as a father character, this is despicable. Someone come arrest this man. He deserves to be behind bars for the rest of his life. Even if one of my hypothetical daughters turned into a vicious creature, I'd still want to keep the other 2 safe. Like, come on. This is beyond out of character. Like, it's not even done for laughs or anything either. There's no comedy in watching this dolt risk the lives of his own children due to his own incompetence. I'm sorry, there's just not. It's not presented as a joke. This character is taking the situation very seriously, and he is actively choosing to put his girls in serious danger. At the very least, this bumbling idiot somehow managed to create an antidote the size of a bus.
The antidote.
Isn't that a little big to swallow?
Not for a Porcuswine. They can swallow an entire bus. Well, if they had buses on Saturn. But they don't support public transportation.
Wow, the professor's a horrible father and unfunny. Things then become a guessing game with the girls and Mojo trying to figure out who's the infected one amongst them. The girls immediately jump to Mojo just because he's Mojo, he's evil, but that's quickly subdued because it's not like he was in control of whether or not he would wind up with the virus. Again, it's completely random. Also, Mojo is supposed to be a scientific genius, so wouldn't you think he'd also be aware of this Porcuswine creating substance? Oh wait, this is the reboot we're talking about here. The show that never understood the most basic character traits of the original series and instead thought it was fleshing them out because they were too one-note, despite those original characters having way more dynamic attributes than this show could ever dream of having. Like seriously, have you ever noticed that the reboot treats the 2 scientist characters like the biggest idiots in the show? I feel like it's trying to say something. So then, Blossom suggests they play a board game.
Why don't we all take a deep breath and play one of these board games the professor left us? How about Settlers of Marshmire? It's all the fun of growing crops and spices, but in board game form, so you don't get dirty.
And somehow, suggesting this caused all of them to turn on her, because I guess all 4 of the characters needed to be blamed at some point for one reason or another? Yeah, kudos to Blossom for trying to make the most of the situation and looking at things on the bright side. By the way, this is a reference to the game Settlers of Catan in case you were curious. Also, apparently it can take up to 3 years for this Porcuswine transformation shit to occur. Stick a pin in that, we'll be coming back to it momentarily. So let's see, then bust in the professor to make things even worse. As if you didn't already see that coming.
I just discovered that the Saturnian Porcuswine is actually a nice monster, after it's viciously devoured any living thing nearby with its massive, razor-sharp teeth. Okay, time to get some shut-eye. Good night.
Ugh, I hate this guy. But at the very least he leaves and everyone tries to get some sleep. Whilst Blossom, Mojo, and Buttercup have trouble trusting the others, Bubbles falls asleep in a jiffy, which immediately raises a red flag to the others trapped in quarantine, and they accuse her of being the Porcuswine. I think that is a somewhat reasonable conclusion to come to if the character that was infected was capable of being aware that they were the one that was infected. Bubbles' complacency with falling asleep really easily, that cannot be connected to whether or not she's infected because none of them have any way of telling, apparently, because you can't test for this, or at least none of the characters ever think to try that. Yeah, this isn't really fair to just jump on Bubbles for that. Maybe she's just accepted that she's gonna die. Oh, but then Bubbles admits it was Buttercup, and they just accuse Buttercup without even hearing Buttercup defend herself.
Buttercup said, "Hey, look at me, drenched in the contents of that dangerous vial. Something bad could happen to me. Buttercup."
Basically, every single one of these characters is being accused of being infected at this point, except none of them are actually justified when they are accused. Which, I mean, I'm at least a little grateful for because there's some character balance here and nobody's directly in the right or wrong. But when you watch all of these characters jump on each other without actually thinking about anything, it's kind of mind-numbing. And then the professor busts in once again to prove he's an idiot.
I ran some tests, and this sample marked B for Buttercup tested negative for porcuswine DNA.
Professor, all of our names start with a B.
I know that, but in this case, oh dear.
And so they all return to bed once again and descend even further into madness until who else but that there professor walks in and transforms into the porcuswine himself.
Help me!
Professor? Are you okay? Ah! The professor's the porcuswine!
As I'm sure you can guess, this is where everything just implodes on itself. Yes, apparently, all this time, the professor had been watching Mojo and the girls, yet he himself was the infected individual. So despite the girls and Mojo getting blasted directly in the face with the radioactive substance 2 feet away from the vial, the professor, who was not only several yards upon yards upon yards away, sitting inside a car, in a hazmat suit no less, was the one that became infected by the gas. How and why? The episode never establishes that he was affected by the explosion. The context clues presented indicate that he was nowhere near that when it had occurred. It's complete bullshit that the professor was possessed by this porcuswine virus. This is a case where the episode is trying so incredibly hard to be clever and subvert expectations to pull a fast one over the audience by having the character that isn't quarantined be the one who was the threat all along, but it doesn't make any fucking sense. Just like some of the things that happened in The Last Jedi or the final season of Game of Thrones, shots fired. You know, I'm really sick and tired of these instances where a movie or show tries to do something shocking and subvert expectations as if it's this incredible, grand achievement or something. Subverting expectations does not automatically equal good writing. Sheesh. Just because you do the unexpected doesn't make it good. And I'm not saying it has to be fulfilling, but it should be good. If the professor even had a chance of becoming the porcuswine himself, why didn't he test himself? No, that's a question that I mentioned earlier. Why doesn't he test anybody? Why can't he just go and test these things? I mean, clearly he knows about the porcuswine virus. He must have some experience with it. There's gotta be a way to at least test for it. Unless he knew the whole time, but then why not just lock himself up and have the girls feed him the antidote once he's transformed? Or how about all 5 of them get locked up in separate rooms? Actually, you know, now that I've thought of that, why didn't he put all 4 of the characters in separate rooms to begin with? That way, the other 3 that aren't infected are completely safe from harm. He's putting the lives of everyone in Townsville outside of the quarantine chamber at risk by not condemning himself. He was there, he was present, he was exposed to the chemical, so why is he not quarantined? That's just a fact of the situation. This guy was there. Why does he get to be the one that gets to be outside of the quarantine chamber if he was present when the thing went off? But let's say he didn't know he was infected. Well, how did he not realize he'd come in contact with the virus? This character is a scientist. I mean, he knew how dangerous the substance was at the very beginning of the episode when they were driving it out into the desert, hence all of his panic and warning. And let's not forget the fact that he is expositing all about this shit for the entire episode up to this point. Yet he can't even realize when his own health was at risk? Seriously? He should be locked up just on the principle that he was there to witness the explosion. Not once did this dude think, I was present at the scene of the explosion. Maybe I should be tested too. Fucking moron. And to make matters more confusing, I thought this process was a slow and monotonous one. You know, how it supposedly takes up to 3 years and all that for the host to be consumed by the virus and transform them into a porcuswine, yet here it's like a day at most after the events took place.
I'll be able to give the antidote once the symptoms start showing, which should be any time in the next, 3 years.
3 years?
What was even the point of establishing the 3-year time span then? Why not just have it take like 48 hours or some shit? There was no point to this. There was no point to including that detail. It's not like this time frame has any effect on the plot. It doesn't. It's just mentioned in passing by the Professor and Blossom once each and changes nothing about the cause and effect chain of events. It was a meaningless detail, and yet the episode has put the idea into our minds that we're supposed to believe this is going to be a very long and drawn out process. So why does it just happen so suddenly? And on that note, what the hell is this show's obsession with making viruses or diseases associated with swine so much? Is it because of the swine flu? Like, okay, I guess that's a real thing, but there are plenty of other diseases out there that come from birds, apes. Why is it always swine? And yes, one could theoretically make the argument that once the professor had become infected, he knew he was infected and he was purposefully locking the girls and Mojo away because they were the only people that would stop him. But then why would he bother telling the characters all of this details in the first place? Why would he explain, this is how you cure it with this antidote? This is what's going to happen. Why wouldn't he just lock them up and then leave and never come back? I rest my case. Mojo goes out and gets the antidote, and then the girls just toss it back and forth a few times until the Porky Swine swallows the pill and Mojo so that the professor may turn back to normal.
Oh, thank you, girls. That was truly scary.
Well, it's all okay now, and everyone's safe.
Excuse me. Little help here.
Because what better way to end this episode than on Vor, am I right? Sheesh, I've had enough of this. Season 3 was going fine for a while there, but sure enough, it found its way back to the shit pile again. And the fact that this is all a result of that pile makes me loathe the episode even more. Quarantine needs to be quarantined away from the rest of Season 3 so that it doesn't taint the moderately okay streak the series had going for it for the past dozen episodes. Kind of. This is just such a horrendous Professor episode, arguably the worst Professor episode in the entire series. Honestly, as much as I loathed the guy before, I haven't had this much contempt for him since Professor Proofed, I think. You know, the one where he acted like a literal child. He's not much better here. In fact, he's worse. The Professor sucks, no matter how many small moments he may have that slightly redeem him. It always comes back to this. Undoubtedly the worst character in the entire series, bar none. My least favorite character in all of animation. All I have left to say is that I'm glad Mojo wasn't also as much of a diluted moron as he usually is. Quarantine is not good. Best to do what the word says and avoid this episode like the plague. Avoid it entirely.